Hello, good morning. This is Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Ansari, Department of Political Science, AMU, Aligarh. Today I'm going to talk about liberty, and that is liberal individualistic view. And in this view, we are going to talk mainly about the negative liberty and positive liberty. That is the debate that is going on, and it continues between these two kind of liberty. So, starting off with the liberal thinkers, as we are talking about, for them, liberty or freedom is the supreme value, and which must be guiding all the principles of public policy and all government actions. So, it is generally the liberty of individual which they wish to protect, and it is defined as the absence of restraint or the absence of constraint or coercion. Now, what type of constraints beset the man which are sought to be removed in pursuance of principle of liberty or freedom? Now, that is a prominent question that comes to mind first of all. So, let's analyze a set of four liberties as given in the Atlantic Charter of 1941 to come to some understanding of what this debate of classical, that is the negative, and the positive liberty, that is the modern concept of liberty, is all about. So the four concepts of freedom, or four ideas of freedom, as given in that Atlantic Charter of 1941, speaks about the first pair of the first pair of freedom. It's mostly about the four freedoms were freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. Now, these four freedoms of speech, worship, fear, and want, if we see what D.D. Raphael in his Problem of Political Philosophy in 1976 said, he said that the two pairs comprise the four freedoms. The first pair of freedom specify two kinds of action, which should be the free or unrestrained. So they answer the question, freedom to do what? So freedom of speech and worship fall under the first category of negative freedom, where non-interference on the part of state is required. The second set of freedom, that of freedom from fear or want, they fall into the category of positive freedom, where the state is required to ensure that an individual is not constrained from performing an activity out of want or out of fear. So it is not essential to remember that these two types of freedom, mainly the negative and the positive liberty, are opposed to each other. In fact, they are complementary, they are two sides of the same coin, and they are incomplete without each other, although some thinkers accord primacy to one over the other. Now, if we talk about a negative liberty, it is one of the important liberty, and it is to be noted that this was a liberty which was mainly supported in 17th century Europe in the wake of Industrial Revolution, with an emphasis that was on negative liberty, particularly in the economic sphere. Now, the main purpose of propagating this negative concept of liberty was intended to pave the way for the establishment of the capitalist economy, or the capitalism, against the prevailing forces of feudalism. So that was a necessity at that time. So the negative aspect of liberty symbolized a negative role of state, that is, not to restrict an individual, especially the entrepreneur, in pursuing his self-appointed goals. For example, if an individual who is otherwise qualified to contest an election and is prevented by others from doing so by use of coercion, so the liberty of the potential candidate is being infringed and violated. So negative liberty rests on two axioms. First is that each individual in society knows his interest best, and this is based on the assumption of the individual as a rational being, as a rational agent with the capacity to deliberate and to make an informed choice. So that was the one which says that individual is the best aware of his own capabilities and his own interest. Now, second axiom says that the state has a limited role to play here. Now, this follows from the first axiom, that is, with the individual agency foregrounded, the state cannot decide ends and processes for the individual. So the champions of negative liberty not only believe in individual choice of resources and the techniques that he employs in generating a product, but also the choice of parties to deal with in their transaction and in the process of bringing out that product, especially the employees, the workers. Thus, freedom of contract was recognized as an essential requirement of liberty at the time. Now, the idea of negative liberty that we are talking, this led to a doctrine. This was a doctrine of laissez-faire, that is non-interference in economic affairs. So that is the freedom from government interference in especially the sphere that deals with the export, import, or give and take or production. So hence, most of the advocates of negative liberty, such as Adam Smith or Jimmy Bentham or James Mill or Henry Sedgwick and Herbert Spencer, they favored a state which was minimalist, that is, it interfered minimum or bare, bare essential interference was tolerated. And it was argued that in an atmosphere of non intervention, the interaction between the self interest of each individual that would result in promotion of social interest as a whole. So the exponents of laissez-faire, non-interference individualism saw society as an aggregate of individuals who are atomized, alienated individuals, and they are joined together by a bond of mechanical unity. Now, this premise was the very basis of propagating or coming up with an ideology of rational individual and rational being, and with that resulted non-interference in the affairs of individual, because he being rational is best aware of what he is doing. So liberty was seen as the freedom of trade, freedom of enterprise, freedom of contract, and freedom of competition of free forces of supply and demand in the market. So the state was viewed as a negative state, a necessary evil which was required not to any way interfere with the natural liberty of man, but only to maintain their ability by protecting their person and property from the onslaught of other individuals. But subsequently, as individuals progressed, and this theory of laissez-faire was guiding their economic affairs, by the middle of 19th century, it became very evident that the capitalist system, supported by negative liberty, had brought about a miserable condition for workers and consumers. Now, this appalling disparity of wealth and power, the mounting oppression, the exploitation, and injustice in society, it amply demonstrated contradictions in this concept of liberty. Now, humanist writers, socialists, Marxists, then positive liberals, they came forward to demand a new definition of liberty. And here they argued that non-interventionist policy of the state, particularly in economic sphere, was not compatible with liberty as a universal principle. So the employers' freedom to hire and fire workers, which became prominent under this philosophy of liberty, of negative liberty or minimalist state, these employers, they hired and fired at their own will, and in the face of a rapidly rising labor force in industrial cities, it had made a mockery of the freedom which was provided to these individuals, and that is the freedom of contract. So the workers were forced to live under constant insecurity, because once they have contracted, it was considered it as they have done out of their own volition, own will, however unfavorable the contract might have been. So the workers were forced to live under constant fear, and they had no security, and there was a threat of unemployment always looming large over them. So to work under uncongenial conditions and to live a life of abject poverty at subhuman level became their destiny. So the benefit of liberty was now sought to be extended to the working class, largely because of the mounting pressure from the working class itself, because they had started organizing, they had started somehow voicing their concerns and demanding the conditions which were more humane for their working. Now, From here, let's understand the view of the exponents of negative state and see what extent each of them mirror the three connotations of liberty that we have discussed in our previous presentation. That was the liberty signifies a choice, absence of constraints, and existence of conditions where the choice of an individual can become a reality. So we find that the application of the concept of negative liberty in economic sphere was problematic as a contract between unequals, whether they are the employer employees or master slave or capitalist or worker or capitalist workers. So it can never qualify the three connotation of the liberty that we talk about here, that is of choice, absence of constraints, and existence of favorable conditions. Now, the workers here, they in industrialist economy of Western Europe, neither they had a choice, that is, not to work. I mean, they had no choice. They had to work because the living conditions was very poor. So, poor economic conditions and the conditions were not conducive for workers to work in a better condition elsewhere. So, they did not have the choice like they go somewhere else and work where the conditions are better. So, almost similarly, because of the competition among these industrialists and capitalists, the chances of providing a much favorable condition was very remote, and the workers had to work. They did not have any choice. So when there was no choice, so the connotation or the meaning of liberty doesn't have any meaning. It becomes just a mockery. So this concept of liberty was proposed from the capitalist point of view when there was a conflict going on between the capitalist and the feudal lords. But now in 19th century, this concept has become redundant. It was not serving the purpose of humanity or individuals in society. So this negative concept of liberty, it brought disaster for the multitude, and now it needed some kind of to a relook, revisitation was necessitated by that consequence which it had generated. So the concept of positive liberty was introduced, and it was with the idea that each self has a higher self and a lower self. Now, the positive liberty is premised on this very concept that an individual has two selves, the higher self and the lower self. So, the higher self, which is a rational self, should attain the mastery over the lower self for the individual or a poor to be liberated in the understanding of the positive liberty. So the lower self has to remain under the higher self, and that is what was premised. So positive liberty is the freedom to do certain things, and it is what can be called the exercise concept of freedom. So it is exercising and availing of the opportunities which negative freedom is just having simply opportunities. It was not having this concept of availing of the opportunity. So unlike negative liberty, positive liberty is open to the idea of directing the individuals either by law or by elite. So as long as the law directs the individual towards rational ends, it liberates rather than oppresses the individual's personality, because this rational ends is directed by the higher self, and the higher self is in the benefit of the individual and as a consequence in the interest of society. So here the major exponent who introduced this concept of positive liberty was John Stuart Mill, and he introduced this positive liberty and consequent transition from the negative liberalism to the positive liberalism. So Mill was the first prominent liberal thinker who realized that the working classes were being deprived of their due share in the capitalist economy, which was based on laissez-faire individualism. So he therefore sought to discover an area where state intervention could be justified. So where state can interfere, or what are those conditions which it can maintain. So this is what he sets on to expose and expound in front of us. So at the outset, he drew a distinction between two types of action of men, whether they are capitalist or whether they are workers. They had a distinction of this, this which J.S. Mills talks about is the self-regarding action and the others regarding action. Now he says the self-regarding action are those which effects are confined to the individual himself, and the other regarding actions which affect others. So here what Mill was advocating was a complete freedom of conduct for the individual in the sphere of safeguarding actions, unless he was proceeding on a self-destructive path due to his ignorance. There should not be any interference in his action which is concerned with his self-regarding activities. However, in the sphere of others regarding activity, Mill conceded the right of the community, and by that the right of the state, to coerce the individual if his conduct was prejudicial to its welfare. So here we find at the time Rousseau as the main votary of the positive liberty when he stated that true liberty is in obedience to the moral law, and the moral law was what was uh, achieved by the general will, that is the will of the community, which is in the interest of the general welfare. So positive liberty also includes the idea of collective control over common life. So society was having here a say in the life of the individual. So, for example, maintaining a pollution-free environment for the common benefit of all. Now, while this may allow a certain degree of coercion, now it is usually justified by the larger good involved, like individuals' contribution in pollution, if it is restricted, or individuals' action which promotes pollution of the healthy environment somehow. So that needs to be protected through legislation. So states' interference in those activities which are harming the interest or common welfare of others is justified. Now, many liberals have suggested that the positive concept of liberty, it carries with it a danger of authoritarianism, because state and society here interferes in the activities of individual. So consider the fate of a here. Let's consider the fate of the oppressed minority. Now, because of the members of this minority, they participate in a democratic process. Now, democratic process which is characterized by majority rule, they might be said to be free on the grounds that they are members of a society, and they are exercising self-control over their own affairs. So they are exercising self-control over their own affairs, but they are oppressed, and so surely they are not free, although they are here following the moral will, the will of the community. But here the will of the community is not in the welfare of all, it is in the welfare of the majoritarian or the majority community. So here the very concept of liberty fails to be in all encompassing. So distinction with regard to positive liberty lay in Mill's effort to define a sphere where an individual's behavior could be regulated in the interest of the community. Now, that was something, a contribution, because before that there was non-interference in the activities or affairs of individual. Thus, he was contemplating a positive role for the state in securing the social welfare, even if it implied curbing liberty of the individual to some extent. Now, it was John Stuart Mill who gave a sound theory of taxation, or he pleaded for the limitation of the rights of inheritance, and he insisted on the state provision of education on this very premise, where the interest of the community is at stake. Now, with that, we enter into the contemporary discussion about the negative and positive liberty. Although we do have supporters even after John Stuart Mill in the form of T.H. Green, J.T. Hobhouse, then Professor Lasky himself, they further developed the positive concept of liberty. T.H. Green postulated a theory of right, and he insisted on the positive role of the state in increasing conditions under which men can effectively exercise their moral freedom. Then Hobhouse, he also, and Lasky, they both postulated that private property, it was no absolute right, and that the state must secure the welfare of the people. So no matter if it is constrained to curtail the economic liberty of privileged individuals, still the state is allowed to make legislations and laws to curtail this right to property and the profit motive, which is what brings the private property among the investing, that is entrepreneurial class. So positive liberty is now regarded as an essential complement of the negative liberty. There is no fight between the negative and positive, since individual has two different kind of activities. So there is no tussle or no conflict between these two. So however, some contemporary liberal thinkers known as libertarians, they have sought to lay renewed emphasis on the negative liberty. And of these, we have Isaiah Berlin, then F.A. Hayak, then Milton Freidmon, and Robert Nozick, whose views are now we are going to talk about and see what they had to say about liberty in the contemporary time. So according to Berlin, liberty implies an absence of restraint. Now, negative liberty of individual consists in not being prevented from attaining his goal by other human beings, whereas positive liberty treats individual as his own master, and state can only secure negative liberty to the individual by ensuring that he is not prevented from choosing his course of action. Now, on the other hand, we know positive liberty belongs to individual's own will and capacity, which is beyond the scope of the state. Now, that is what Berlin is premising. Now, here he is giving a kind of a twist to political here positive liberty, saying it belongs to individuals' will and capacity, which is beyond the scope of the state, whereas what we understand by positive liberty till 20th century was the maintenance of certain conditions and state's intervention in those activities. Okay, so if someone cannot afford a university education, according to Berlin, for one's child, or one cannot provide nutritious food to his family members, it is his own incapacity, and state has no role in it to play. So the capacity or incapacity to fulfill one's desire, he says, belongs to man himself. Now here state has no interference, and the state is not concerned in any manner with this sphere of activity. So Berlin has thus taken a position that the availability or non-availability of means is entirely an individual's own concern, and that the state has no responsibility of making the required means available to the individual. So according to the existing social inequalities, it cannot be questioned from the point of view of liberty that the Berlin was propounding here. So he almost asked the state not to intervene in the individual status, and his status of poverty, it cannot be questioned on these lines. So he was in fact promoting the negative kind of liberty. So the concept of liberty as proposed by Berlin is quite untenable, as we can see. He is referring to such disabilities as the product of the social arrangement that can be altered by political action. He wants the state not to interfere. So an urge for removal of such disabilities has led to several social and political movements and even revolutions, and lots of people are poor, they are backward, they are ignorant, not because of their own failure. That capacity could have been altered. So inability or negligence, but because of the social injustice, because of their status somehow in the society, which deprived them of those means which they could have acquired had they been positively provided those means. So the sources or the source of their plight may be traced to what aptly be termed as coercion by other individuals, because resources are in limited supply, and who is to ensure one gets the equal distribution? And that was not possible. So the one who was stronger, they acquired more, and the weaker ones, they got less, and in the bargain they were deprived of those means which would have brought them better prospects. So the state intervention would be justified by Berlin's own standard here, because the coercion by other individual is something which he says is to be avoided, to have this concept of liberty. But liberty here, since it is the resources are unequally distributed, so there has been a coercion. So coercion of other individuals is to be avoided. So Berlin contradicts himself here when he says that state should not interfere. In fact, the state should intervene and look that inequalities are removed. So to provide a cripple with an artificial leg, or an ignorant man with education, or an unemployed man with a job, all count as positive extension of the freedom. So if a man is faced with lack of capacity in the fulfillment of his desire, he will not make it a political issue until he is convinced that his incapacity, it emanates from socio-economic conditions, and that it can be removed by making certain policies or certain changes in those conditions. So in other words, negative liberty denotes an absence of restraint, so that the state shall abstain from imposing unreasonable restraints on the individual. And positive liberty signifies removal of constraints that are the product of the social setup, and which are capable of being removed by making necessary changes in the social setup. Now, if you see the view of what Hayek has to say, he argued that a man, he possesses liberty or freedom when he is not subject to coercion by the arbitrary will of another. Now, this is the essence of individual freedom, which should not be confused with any other means of freedom. Now, Hayek here particularly sought to contrast individual freedom with three other means of freedom, which he represents as saying political freedom, the inner freedom, and the freedom as power, respectively. So, political freedom denotes participation of man in the choice of their government. Now, in the process of legislation, the control of administration, this does not necessarily coincides with the individual freedom. That is what he says. And further, he argues that a non-democratic order may be permissive, or undemocratic order may be restrictive. So hence, political freedom is neither a necessary or nor a sufficient condition of freedom itself in universal terms. So he talks now about inner freedom. Now, inner freedom denotes the extent to which a person is guided in his action by his own considered will, rather than by the momentary impulse or the circumstances. Now, it stands opposed not to coercion by others, but to moral weaknesses or the influence of those passing emotions. Hence, it is different from individual freedom again. So finally, freedom as power. Now, it signifies the power to satisfy one's wants, or the extent of choice that are available to the alternate in the form of alternatives. Now, there is a vital difference between non-interference with another's act and a person's effective power to act. A person may be able to do what he may not lawfully do, and unable to do what nobody is trying to prevent him from doing. So hence, freedom as power should not be confused with individual's freedom. Then the importance of freedom to a particular thing has nothing to do with the number of persons who want to do it. So it is quite possible that the freedom vital to social progress may not be widely sought. So Hayek therefore asserts that it is better that some should be free than none, and further better that many should be having full freedom than all having a limited freedom. So according to Hayek, the cake of freedom is not to be divided on the basis of equal share for all. And his argument is against equality basically, and he bases it on two premises. In the first place, he says that the liberty consists in absence of coercion in the sphere of individual activity by other individuals or the state. And secondly, he further observes that the individual differ in their talent and skills and their equality before the law. Now, if it is in consonance with principle of liberty, it is bound to create inequality in their actual position in terms of their material status. So hence, any attempt to create a material equality in the form of any aid or any kind of subsidy that a government may provide to those who are incapable or unequal because of their natural talent for inequality, that itself is a kind of a coercion, is bound to involve a coercion which would deprive them of their freedom, because they, by nature, they are unequal, and state, by providing them the means through certain policy or legislation, it is simply making them unnatural or further unequal, because nature did not intended them that way. So it bounds to create inequality in their actual position in terms of their marital status. Now, further on, if we see the view of Milton Friedman here, he sought to identify capitalism or competitive market economy as a necessary condition of freedom, now which implies the repudiation of equality for the sake of maintaining freedom. So he defined freedom as absence of coercion of a man by his fellow men, and argues that freedom of individual, or perhaps of the family, is the liberal's ultimate goal in judging social arrangements. So he suggests that a free private enterprise or exchange economy or competitive capitalism is both a direct component of freedom and a necessary, though not a sufficient, condition of political freedom. Now, Friedman's contempt for equality is inherent in his very concept of freedom when he argues that in order to maximize their freedom, government should be allowed to handle only those matters which cannot be handled through the market at all, or can be handled only at a greater cost, that the use of political channels may be preferable. So accordingly, government is required not to sustain or supplement the market society and nothing beyond that. Now, this would mean that a government is moving out of almost all welfare and regulatory functions and controls on all supports or prices, wages, interest rates, rents, exports, imports, and amounts to be produced would all have to go. So would present social security program, or the housing subsidy programs and the like, all have to go. So as it was quoted by Friedman in his Capital Economy, labor force exists because without its own sufficient capital, hence it has no choice in the market. So because workers do not have choice, and to deprive them of what they should have got had they got the choice, so it is in fact is a kind of a coercion, and state should not retreat on these matters. So man needs a creative freedom to put his labor into creative channel, and he cannot remain idle like an animal or a machine. So the capitalism obstructs his attempt to employ his labor creatively with a free market choice, as he is coerced by the market forces which are beyond his control. So only possibility of mitigation of this coercion lies in a regulatory uh, mechanism which are developed by state, and which Friedman opposes. So hence Friedman's concept of freedom is ill-conceived, and it is, to an extent, it's a partial concept. So the state comes into existence for the performance of limited functions, particularly for the maintenance of property right of the individuals, and he cannot. That leads to this leads to legitimacy of a minimal state which does not engage in a redistributive transfer among the citizens who were originally in it are its clients. So inequalities at the level of production should not be sought to be rectified at the level of distribution. However, if there is only one source of water in desert, nobody should be allowed to monopolize. That is what Robert Nozick says. But this restriction should not apply to the products of human effort, or the product of their talent. So thus, uh, if he would, if individual makes a discovery of a remedy of some fatal disease, he is entitled to demand any price for it. Now, in this way, Nozick here assumes that all inequalities of wealth and power are the product of individuals' differences in talents and efforts, and that it would not be just to remove or reduce these inequalities by redistributive transfers. So further on, we find the views of here uh, other scholars as well who talked about liberty. So here we have Charles Taylor. He discussed the two type of liberty as an opportunity, as the opportunity concept of freedom, that is negative liberty, and as the exercise concept of freedom as a positive liberty. So for Taylor, the concept of freedom is inclusive of the concept of self-realization. Now, this notion of self-realization is something we knew unique to each individual and can only be worked out independently. So Charles Taylor feels that a pure opportunity concept of freedom is inadequate to attain the freedom inclusive of self-realization. As Taylor himself states that we cannot say that someone is free on a self-realized view if he is totally unrealized. For example, if you have the potential to sing well, or to the extent that nobody goes out of the way to deny you the opportunity, your sphere of negative liberty has not been violated. However, you're not liberated till you don't exercise the freedom to realize your potential as a singer. So, realization, self realization of talent and potentialities is what the real freedom is all about that talks. Uh, Charles Taylor talks, and merely exercising freedom does not lead to any attainment of that self realization, because there are certain conditions which try to motivate an individual for the manifestation or achieving that self-realization. And one is not free if one is motivated through, let's say, the fear or inauthenticately internalized standards or false consciousness. So if you're exercising your potential to be a good singer because somebody coerced you, or you think it will elevate your social standing in society, or you think if it is a way to be popular among your friends, then the quest for this self-realization, which is liberty in fact, is a motivated one. So Taylor also states the subject cannot be the final authority on deciding what one desires are authentic or not. This is because others may know us better than we know ourselves. So with that, we move on to the view of MacCallum in 1967. He pointed out that there is no simple dichotomy between negative and positive kind of a liberty. Rather, we should recognize that there is a whole range of possible interpretations or conceptions of the single concept of liberty. And he explains liberty as a triadic relationship in the following manner, saying like X is free from Y to do or become Z. So according to MacCallum, a subject, or that is an agent, is free from certain constraints or preventing conditions to do or become certain things. Now, if the triad is there, the three relations are maintained, then the liberty is there. So freedom is therefore a triadic relation, that is a relation between three things: agent, certain preventing conditions, and certain doing or becoming of the agent. So any statement about freedom or unfreedom can be translated into a statement of the above form by specifying what is free or what is unfree, from what it is free or unfree, and what is free or unfree to do or become. So any claim about the presence or absence of freedom in a given situation will therefore make certain assumptions about what count as an agent, then what count as a constraint and limitations of freedom, and then what counts as the purpose that the agent can be described as either free or unfree to carry out. Now, we move on to the conclusion part, and we find that the more logical distinction between the negative liberty and positive liberty is the one where find the focus is on the role of the state under different situations. So according to this view, negative liberty consists in the absence of restraint, that is non-interference by the state in certain activities of the individual, that is to enable him to pursue his own happiness as long as he doesn't obstruct the similar happiness of pursuance of happiness by others. And positive liberty is consists of extending the opportunity to the individuals to pursue his happiness where he is obstructing in doing so, or he is obstructed in doing so for want of means or capacity due to the prevailing socio-economic conditions. Now, there can be absolutely no freedom unless there is also effectively unlimited to remove any hindrance to people doing what they want to do. Thus, counting as an extension of freedom any state regulation which seeks to reconcile the claim of liberty with opportunity, in fact, signifies the transition from negative liberty to positive liberty. So, all in all, both these aspects are complementary, they are not contradictory, as long as both work in the welfare of the general community. Now, with that, I come to the end of this presentation. Thanks for watching. Thank you.